pop this into YouTube. So you guys can follow along with me if you want to. I'm not going to go through this document, but yes, you called us Nazis. The claim now is from Hillary and from the DTC that this never happened. So what I decided to do was put together this reference document. And no, it's not an essay. It's a reference document. So anyone who's capable of clicking a link can see all the evidence with the necessary context to make the whole situation completely undeniable. And because certain bad faith actors have also made the demands that I extract all of this and do all of this work that I did on the Google Doc and dump it into Facebook, which may not even be possible. And it's the reason I went to Google Doc in the first place. No, I'm not doing it. There's a reason I made a Google Doc and didn't use other means. There's a reason I didn't do this in Microsoft Word and try to share some sort of Word document somewhere. No. There's a reason I didn't do this on Facebook. There's a reason I didn't do this on Twitter. And that's because it may not even be possible if it's remotely feasible. Of course, this is the most technically feasible way of doing this, and the most digestible way of doing this. So no, I'm not going to be just extracting all of that onto Facebook, especially when some of those posts are on Facebook to begin with. So what I've been doing with this document is I've been updating it. I've been extracting. I've been handling archived links. So if we go down to to some of these links here, you can see, I've put in archived links. I haven't finished all of it, but this is an ongoing project that I'm sure a lot of you have already seen. So since this is a continuously updating archive, that's what it is. It's not an essay. Folks, let me know in the comments if you want me to put together a formal essay, maybe a video essay, so that it's all in plain English for everybody to understand, so that we can get the context into a more digestible format. Let me know. It's going to be a ton of work for me to do something like that. So I have no plans to do that right now unless I get bombarded with requests to do so. The reference document is there for everyone to see who somehow didn't see it. And really it's there so that when somebody says to you, no, this never happened, you can go, oh, well, here's the Google Doc. And we can just go right through. There's a link to that video. There's a link to that video. There's that photo. There's that photo. There's that screenshot. There's that archive link. And you can just go through the document and show whoever makes these dumb claims to you, no, they're just wrong. And what's wild is, again, the DTC's official position is this all never took place, and that the DTC as a body does not outlive its constituency, which is insane. Which is insane. It's completely opposite of the position that the Marine Corps has taken, which is the Corps outlives the Marines, right? The Marines may die in the field of battle, but there is always the Corps. There are always more men to take their place. By the way, if they're going to take this position, then there's no argument for reparations. The United States doesn't outlive the members of the United States that are members of the When the people that held slaves in 1843 or whatever died, so did slavery with them by that argument. And you could never hold the United States responsible for all of that. You've just destroyed the Democrat claim for reparations in one sentence, essentially, right? And again, this is completely antithetical to what the entirety of not just the Marine Corps, but the Navy, the Army, the Air Force, all of our military forces, the whole concept of the country and these military forces, the whole reason of establishing a town committee in the first place is so that you have a separate entity, which then necessarily outlives its constituency. And what they've intimated in private and said in public off camera, and the thing is that they've intimated this in private, they've said it in public off camera. It was their take when Hillary talked about it in chat on this show, right? And it's on camera in the September 12th town council meeting, which we have right here. So anyone can go to YouTube, type in Town of New Milford, go through their videos, and boom, there it is, September 12th, 2022, regular town council meeting. You can go to the appointments and reappointments section, which is where this entire conversation was taking place. At that same meeting, and under that same agenda item, and why this conversation was taking place, was the appointment of, at that same meeting, of a personal friend in front of the show, Paul Murphy, who's watching now. Paul, thanks for watching. to the town council. He was there to, the idea was to have him fill the vacancy left on the town council by one of the members who had resigned. So, Paul, since I know you're watching, congrats, man. Like, looking forward to seeing you on the town council, so people know. So for those of you who didn't get a chance to see it, here is the motion to get Paul nominated onto the town council.
So now, under item 6, make a motion to approve the appointment to the town council, filling a vacancy left by Joseph Fela, Paul Murphy. His term would be September 12th, 2022 through November 30th, 2023.
Second.
And so for those of you who haven't seen it, here is the vote on the matter.
So we have Mr. Murphy up for town council. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed.
Any abstentions? Thank you.
So you'll notice that this wasn't exactly unanimous. You'll notice that Hillary Ram and Alexander Thomas abstained from voting. I don't know why. They're in the room. They clearly had to have been informed on the matter in some way, at least. If they're informed to speak on the topic at all, then wouldn't they be informed at least to some degree on the matter? Are they really abstaining from voting, or are they just trying to avoid doing what Mary Jane Lundgren did, knowing that she's probably a lame duck candidate at this point because her popularity is tanked? And you'll notice that Mary Jane Lundgren didn't vote in favor, Mary Jane Lundgren voted against affirming Paul Murphy to that vacated seat. So what exactly were the objections? We have one of the objections in Alexander Thomas, who had this to say before the vote was cast.
I think it's very important to have a council member who is a veteran. I think that's a wonderful thing to do. My only concern with Mr. Murphy is I don't know you, but I do have a recollection of some volatile remarks toward council members, and it concerns me that we keep our business for the town at the council table and politics away from the council table, and that I wouldn't want politics to come to the table as a result of having Mr. Murphy join us.
It's a political body. It is a necessarily political body. Randy DeBella has said this explicitly on multiple occasions. And I don't even have to appeal to the authority of Randy DeBella to point that out. Like, I get what she's trying to say, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this. But yes, the town council is a necessarily political body. How they make their decisions is not prescriptively, as in they do not make their decision based on a pre-existing law that they must conform to, right? Is the presentation that's coming before us, the question before us is this red? Well, this is red. Therefore, it is red. Therefore, we must vote in favor of it. Is this setback the number of feet away from where the other piece of property is? Well, you take a measuring tape and, well, there it is. Therefore, we must approve. If it's not, we must reject. That'd be like the zoning board. The zoning board is not a political body. That's not how town council makes their decisions. They make their decisions based on value judgments. You can make a decision based on, you know what? I don't want to hire this guy because I don't like the color of his tie, right? There's a whole litany of decisions that you're allowed to make on these bodies that comport and conform with the nature of the body as being a political body. And Randy DeBella has said exactly this thing. Now, but that's not the key point to take away. The key point to take away is what exactly was Paul's supposed commentary that was out of line. Yes, Paul Murphy is outspoken when it comes to his politics. He has consistently advocated for Republican candidates. He was chair of the RTC. Like, of course he's going to be advocating for Republican candidates. Of course he's going to be advocating for Republican politics. Of course he's going to be advocating on behalf of an ideology that comports with the RTC here in town and probably the Republican Party in general more broadly. Of course he's going to be doing that. So what? So would I do the exact same thing as a libertarian when it came to libertarian candidates. If we had a libertarian candidate that was running for office around here, yes, I absolutely would be, doing what I could to spread the word that this person is running and that you should vote for this person. Of course, I would advocate for that sort of thing. Of course, I would be outspokenly advocating for libertarian politics and policy and principles and ideologies. Paul does that, and he does that without holding back, if you will. He does it without any reluctancy, which is what you would want out of, if you're a Republican, an RTC chair. It's what Democrats do all the time. And it's because they're Democrats and they want to get Democrats elected. This is a non-issue, right? He's also, more importantly, one of a number of veterans who ask for an apology from the DTC for some of their more egregious actions, or at least some of the more obviously egregious claims made by ranking members of the party's officership. In one case, the chair of the DTC. And of course, the DTC now takes the opinion of, we're not apologizing for what the former chair said because the former chair is no longer the chair, and the DTC does not outlive its membership, which is just like completely insane, right? Like, what, you couldn't sue a business then because the owner of the business is a different business than the owner before? No, that's ridiculous, and you know it. So all of this culminated with something of an exchange between Sal and Hillary. All of this culminated with that exchange between Sal and Hillary that you guys saw, where Hillary is just denying that any of these sort of things happen, which again, we showed you the Google Doc. We can go through it. Anyone can click on and go through it. But it didn't stop there. Hillary doubled down, and Sal had to explain everything I just said when it comes to Republicans and the veterans in town who were speaking on behalf of veterans in town and who were demanding an apology for commentary made that was obviously disparaging of them.
That's the perfect example. Next time I have to read a little more. Anyway, so they were coming here.
Actually, time out.
No. I'm speaking right now.
It's my time. Excuse me.
This is my time.
He's
In
got
my
the
time.
floor.
My time.
Hillary, please allow, as the parliament,
What is
as
the
the,
name? Who's the one
we have
who
no
keeps
parliament.
It's my time right now.
But as a sergeant at arms,
So
he's
I would
speaking.
like to know. I
It's my
understand.
time.
Well,
It's
my
his
time.
he's insulting half of
He's
this
not insulting.
I'm not
body.
insulting anything.
I
I was
insulting anybody. He's
Okay,
bringing up some
can I
facts. So
finish?
please let
Those are not
Councilman
facts.
Brankovic
Can I
speak.
finish?
Please let him finish.
Got
Okay.
it. I
Next time. I was born in Poland. If you can hear my accent, my relatives died in Auschwitz and Buchenwald and some other things. And the DNC until today, New Milford DNC, didn't have a guts.
DTC.
DNC, you guys, the Democrats in this town, have not apologized. So let me finish, and then you have a time to speak. We have the flyers and everything. The veterans were coming here day after day, earlier this year, trying to find out why haven't you apologized, and you haven't apologized. Now, I don't care, to be honest with you, if you don't read the history, who's the Nazi, who's not a Nazi, what the Nazi salute looks like.
you bring the
But
postcard? Did you
I'm
bring the
just,
postcard?
let me finish.
Okay.
Let me finish.
I don't want to.
But you haven't apologized to those people, never ever.
business.
And they saved it, they served this country, and they're great patriots. And you haven't done this to Dell, and you're complaining about the language? Is that a joke, or is it a joke?
And the answer, of course, is yes, it must be. It must be seen as one at the very least in order for anyone to take it seriously. And for those of you who didn't catch it, yes, Hillary Ram was, if you didn't catch it there, intimating that all of these things that are in that Google document never happened. Because could you please bring all of that documentation to the next town council meeting so we have that evidence before us? Like, if for those of us who didn't have eyes and who were living on Mars in 2021 during that election cycle, none of this needed to happen, though. This was all during the conversation to appoint Paul Murphy to the town council to fill the vacancy left by the resignation of Joe Fiala. This whole thing, and right down to the debate descending into the DTC looking foolish, this didn't have to happen. Mike putting together the Google Doc that everyone's seen now, that didn't have to happen. Paul Murphy's appointment shouldn't have taken like 20 minutes. It should have taken like 1. The Dems wanted the appointments, and the reason I say this is because it was these Democrats that said it was Hillary and Alexandra that wanted the appointments separated this way. Katie Francis was the one that said what we normally do if we're going to separate the appointments and reappointments is to separate them based on appointments and reappointments, or to just vote on them as on the whole. And it, from what I could tell of things, Katie Francis was perfectly ready to just vote on all of them at once. And if that had been the case, then you'd be voting for a whole bunch of people all at once, and you'd have to be taking Paul Murphy's in at the same time, which is why the Democrats wanted to break this out. But this all backfired 30 seconds later, because if you want to be a genie, you got it. And everything that goes with it. Remember, town council is a necessarily political body. Most committees and commissions aren't. For example, zoning, ZBA, the Zoning Board of Appeals, these aren't political bodies. The WPCC, excuse me, yes. The Inland Wetlands Commission is not a political body. So when Irene Scarballo's name came up for reappointment, well,
This is a reappointment to Inland Wetlands Commission, which is also the New Milford Aquifer Protection. It's the appointment for Irene Scribello. Her term would be September 12th, 2022 through January 31st, 2026. Do I have a second?
Second?
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Any discussion on the motion?
Yeah,
Bruce?
I didn't support her appointment to begin with, and I still would not support her reappointment either.
Any other?
I'll just say that she has served as an alternate in good standing and has attended all the meetings, so I think she's been doing her job so far.
Any other discussion? Tom?
Yeah, I won't be supporting her tonight. I mean, I feel this is a regulatory body, not a preclusive body. And I've just found in reading some of the minutes and comments from there that it is more, for her, it's more preclusive and not to the letter of the regulations. So I will not be supporting her tonight. I did not support her before. Thank you.
Any other discussion on the motion? Okay, seeing as there are none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed?
Wow.
Abstain?
Here.
And one abstention. Okay.
it didn't have to be like this, Hillary. You want to be a genie, you got it. And everything that goes with it, as the saying goes. What then immediately took place, ensued, was Hillary threw a fit. And I wish I could have gotten it on camera, but that's not my job there. The next thing was to move on with the agenda items, and Katie Francis was moving on with the agenda items. You know, if I was doing this just for this show, if I had an entirely separate broadcast and somebody else was doing the town council meeting itself, yes, I would have focused the camera and mics entirely on Hillary Ram, who spent the next 20 minutes slamming papers, slamming books, packing her things up as though she was about to leave. She never did wind up leaving. But again, like, this didn't have to be the case. And what's sad is that this isn't a Democrat versus Republican issue. For example, on tomorrow night's agenda is Tim Clark, who is a Democrat, who is among a host of other Democrats set to be appointed to a commission, just like any other appointments process would go. And I'm telling you now, I'm telling everyone in advance, there's going to be no objection to any of this. There's going to be no objection to any of the Democrat candidates, the Democrats who have been nominated to fill these positions on these appointed committees and commissions. Just like every other appointment, these things are going to be going on without objection. This isn't a Democrat-Republican issue. Like I've said 1,000,000 times, this is a matter of a handful of members of the DTC leadership who have just lost touch with the common Democrat voter here in New Milford. There's the reason that they're giving for not offering apology of the DTC not outlasting his membership, unlike what the veterans would suggest, is not only insane, but we all know why they're doing it. And that's because the real reason is that they can't. They can't do that because this is what they honestly believe. They honestly believe these things, which is why they coincide and perfectly comport with what they were espousing about Republicans a year ago. And this position is just wildly out of touch with the common voter in New Milford, even when it comes to Democrats here in New Milford, 73-27, folks. It's probably also why they don't want to debate, which is that they know they can't. It's not that they know that they're not good at it, but it's if they so much as acknowledge that it's worth The concept of platforming wouldn't exist from the Republican ranks, wouldn't exist from the conservative or right side of the aisle, or from even libertarian ranks. That word would never come into existence unless you had this pretty far left and pretty narrow Overton windowed far left take on the world, right? That you are doing something incorrect by even going onto the debate stage with somebody who is so evil. If you're going to characterize people the way the DTC has characterized common Republicans, your average Pete Bass voter here in New Milford, 73 to 27, then you can't go on the debate stage. Because then by merely assuming the debate stage, you've already lost it. Right? And the thing is that, like, I wanted to see a debate so badly last year between the two mayoral candidates at the very least that I was willing to bring the whole setup that everybody sees every time we have the town council meetings. This $20,000 in gear that's going to take me hours and hours to set up. I would have done it for free. And I would have found a way to broadcast it town-wide so anyone could see it at any location. Some of that was self-serving because I like debates. I like watching debates. And fortunately for me, that's what we're seeing at this time of year. And that's what's been taking place over the last week or two. And what we've kind of been talking about was the impetus for why I wanted to do this in the first place. Not only do I like watching debates, it's actually a very healthy, it's a good way when they're done correctly to get at least some idea of what the candidates' viewpoints are in contrast with the other candidates. So in the past week, we've had a number of debates. Last week, we had a debate between Johanna Hayes and George Logan for Connecticut's 5th U.S. Congressional District. I'm sure you guys saw this post that I put together where I was hoping to get a watch party put together, but it was kind of last minute and I didn't really have the time. But you guys can go check that out if you'd like. Let me see if I have the link in my notes so I can drop that into the comments here. No, I don't have a link to the actual video itself, but it's in that post. You guys can see that post. I'm sure you guys have seen that post. Follow me on Facebook if that's how if you want to be able to see these things. One of the things I wanted to do when doing this, like I said, was I wanted to watch this with some friends and be able to converse with them through voice so we could hear each other's voices while we were watching this debate, because it's just fun to do those sort of things and to get those watch parties put together. We'll have to, I want to rewatch it, and we'll have to put a watch party together. In short, it didn't really go all that well for George Logan, who I think has actually performed, and it's too bad, because not only is it an incredibly important seat and it's a long shot, but a flippable seat, a losable seat in the case of the incumbent. But George just sounds so much better in interviews than he does in general on a debate stage. This isn't the only debate that I've seen, but it's the only one that I can get easy access to and that we can rewatch later. Like I said, in a watch party, so we can have that call-in feature. Speaking of which, for those of you who want to participate in Q&A, you guys can do it like you guys have throughout the course of this show's history. But I'm going to drop a link in the chat right now to the Discord server. So if you guys want to call in the show, you guys can do that. So let me just drop this into Facebook. For those of you who want to call into the show, just go ahead, click this invite link to my server, my Discord server, and then go into the voice channels. Get yourself set up for voice. Just go into the general for now, and I'll pull you into the Chatting with Mike channel. That way we can talk at the end of the show during Q&A and a call. And I'm going to try to continue to have this every time we do this show. And I really want to do this for the watch party, which we'll be having hopefully later this week. We'll have to see how things go. I'm not going to have a whole lot of free time, like I've said before, for these sorts of things. But while we're at it, since we're talking about debates that I want to rewatch again, because I did manage to get a chance to watch this debate between Hayes and Logan. One of the other debates I did manage to get, since I am a libertarian, why not? I know it's way outside of Connecticut. I know it's not really New Milford, but hey, it's a libertarian thing. So allow me, folks, 15 seconds to show you guys one of the things I want to be doing later on this week as well, which is a watch party for this debate between Arkansas's House of Representatives District 2, where PBS, if you can believe it, had the guts to invite a libertarian onto the stage in the likes of Mike White, who's in the center of these three folks on your screen right now, who absolutely mopped the floor with the other two candidates. No offense to the Republicans watching. It's Arkansas. Again, I know it's way out of state. I know it's way out of region, but it was fun because we had a really good libertarian candidate here, and it's fun to be able to see, some of my party actually getting something of a center stage. So we'll have to do a watch party for that as well. Let me see if I have a link to that as well, so you guys can. Yeah, here we go. This is, we'll put this into Facebook right now. There's the Facebook link, the link in Facebook. We'll pump it into YouTube as well, so you guys can check that out if you'd like, and get yourself primed up for later on this week when we hopefully have a chance to do that. Speaking of things to come, Tuesday night at 7, mark your calendars. I've gotten hold of Pat Callahan out of Connecticut's 108th Congressional District. It's a state seat, of course, and that is represented currently by Pat Callahan, who is the incumbent there. Let's see. Here he is in a photo with Billy Mo Buckby over at the State House. So, Pat, if you're in the chat, thank you so much for agreeing to come on. We are going to have Pat on Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Just like we always do with our candidates. We'll have our live Q&A at the end. He'll be on for about an hour, so right around 7:45 or so. That's what we'll probably switch over to your Q&A. Hopefully, we'll be able to get some folks in on the Discord server for live call-in questions, so you guys can really get access to these candidates, who in the case of Pat Callahan, in the 108th district, represents parts of northwestern New Milford, Sherman, New Fairfield, and a little tiny part of Danbury as well. So again, reminder, join the Discord for that sort of thing. It'll help you get reminders too, because as soon as I get the opportunity, I'll be building that event. So check that out. Be ready for that. Hopefully we'll get all the other candidates in the area as well. Billy. And so this is an invitation to anyone who's running for an elected office that in any way directly affects New Milford. If it's a House seat, a Senate seat in D.C., if it's George Logan, if you want to come on, please do come on. This is an invitation even for Johanna Hayes, if Johanna Hayes wants to come on. We've already had Steve Harding on. Steve, who is running to represent the Connecticut's 30th Senate District, which represents New Milford. So, Steve, if you're watching, thanks so much for coming on. Let's do it again. Now, I'm saying that as kind of a lip service because Steve and I have actually talked. I got a chance to talk with him actually last Tuesday night at a debate here in Torrington. So, I did send out my invitation to live stream this debate in Torrington, as you folks, I'm sure, saw. It's something I really wanted to have happen. It's something I really wanted to have videos for. And this is what you guys, I'm assuming, are here for, to get an update from somebody who was there on how that debate went between Steve Harding and his opponent, in this case, Democrat Ava Zimmerman. So, Steve, look out, folks. Look out for Steve too, because he's probably going to be coming back onto the show. I'm going to reach out to him and see if we can get him on next week. So stay tuned for that. Thanks, Steve, for coming on the first time. Hopefully we'll be able to get you on soon. He has actually promised to do, if he gets elected, to come on to the show roughly once a month and do a Senate update, which would be amazing. I would love to do just a once a month, just have a show devoted to Steve so that he can, we can have a back and forth and we can all get an update on what's happened in the Senate over in Hartford. So as you guys are aware, I'm sure you guys saw this post that I put together. I've gotten a lot of requests to update people on what happened during that debate. And I'll give you one word, and the word is wild. Ginny Lamgree, if you're in the chat, Ginny, I will pull you on right now if you want, so we can talk about this. Because it was pretty wild. And I'm sure you guys have seen this post that I put together. It was a rush job. I have my handwritten notes on my yellow steno pad. This is what I had time to put together. And folks, this is real. These are real quotes from that debate. And I told you I would take the time to contextualize some of these sort of things because, they maybe context could cover for some of these things. Well, in short, you want my notes, you got them. And, we're going to get into contextualizing some of these things. But just so you're aware, let's just run right through them real quick. So Harding was quoted during, I believe, I don't remember where this was, but at one point Harding said, quote, "Zoning should be local. I oppose statewide zoning," end quote. Tell me what you guys think of that statement. Quote, if you're finding dealers who are selling fentanyl, they need to go to jail because they are killing people, end quote. Raise your hand in the chat if you oppose that. And then on electric vehicles not contributing to gas tax collections because they don't. They don't burn gas. Quote, I would caution against adding further fees, end quote. Again, as the libertarian in the room, as the New Milford resident who has to buy gas and burns gas every day, just like all of you, is that something you really object to? On income tax rates for businesses and individuals, quote, I would fight against any tax increases anywhere, end quote. You would kind of expect the fourth from the third. Now on to Ava Zimmerman. And before we get onto this, again, these are all of the full direct quotes I was able to get my notes on. I'm not the fastest writer and my handwriting sucks. So forgive me if this might seem a little biased because it might seem like I was only taking the quotes that I felt like I needed to take. Okay, fine. I did only take the quotes that as fast as my hand could go. The ones that really stood out to me were the ones I was going to really devote attention to, make sure I got all of. True. From her opening statements, quote, a 12-year-old knows right from wrong, end quote. Okay, are you sure about that, Ava? On affordable housing, quote, we don't want corporate greed or capitalism to take over, end quote. Okay, on electric vehicles not contributing to the gas tax collections, quote, our environment is in peril right now. This emergency happened yesterday, end quote. Raise your hand in chat if you think that's taking it way too far. Anyone? I mean, we can compare that to Steve Harding's quote. I would caution against adding any further fees. It seems like Steve doesn't seem to be opposed to the idea of EVs in a market environment replacing gasoline engines if they can on their own do that. What's one step further than that? Is there such a thing as going too far with that? On income tax rates for businesses and individuals, quote, trickle-down economics doesn't work, end quote. So we're going to go on. I want to go on and talk about where these things came from and give you guys asked for my notes. You got them. We're going to do that. We're going to go over that right now. First things first, I want to talk about the debate itself. The debate itself was carried by the League of Women Voters. It was organized, carried, and conducted by the League of Women Voters. Now, they claim to be an apolitical body, which is just false. It's false. They are overtly, I'll say, left-leaning. They are not overtly crazy left. They are not overtly leftist. They may be crazy left. They may be leftists, but not overtly. I'd say they're overtly left of center. Probably just left of, say, CPTV or PBS, which is definitely left of center. And I think that's why these debates are actually happening, because they're effectively the only body that Democrats will actually conceive of as being somewhat centrist enough for them to go on to these debates, for them to agree to these debates. Remember, if you're right of... If the League of Women Voters was actually perfectly politically neutral, they would be seen as fascists. They would be seen by the hardcore left as radicals. They would be seen and treated the way the DTC in 2021 treated generic Republicans here in New Milford. And not even generic Republicans. Generic people who voted for Pete Bass in 2019, right? Which in many cases is hundreds and hundreds of Democrats who in 2021 became thousands of Democrats who voted for Pete Bass instead of Ted Hine. So just so you're aware, it's being conducted by the League of Women Voters. And kudos to them for actually putting on these debates. But the reason that I think that you're seeing, Hearst media publications, which are far left, the reason you're seeing PBS, which is definitely left of center, the reason you're seeing these institutions carrying these debates is because they're at least left of center, and they're the only ones that will actually get the Democrats to agree to come to these debates. You're not going to be able to get the Waterbury Republican American to put on a debate that any Democrat's going to attend. You're not going to get me in my show to invite a moderator who is definitely left of center I could invite a definitely left of center moderator to conduct the whole thing. And it would be me basically just using the Mike Sennello show and my Facebook account and my YouTube channel to make the thing physically happen, and they wouldn't show. So you're aware, this is the organizing body. This is the spirit of the thing. And it's also why the questions were what they were, and why none of the questions I submitted made it through screening, even sort of, though I tried my damnedest to make them as politically neutral as possible, even though, yes, a lot of those questions were directed at some of the things Ava Zimmerman said. It's why 30% of the time was spent on police accountability, like 15% on abortion, and like 20% on the environment. And why virtually none of the time was spent on economics as it relates specifically to the state, as it relates to financial insolvency, or a basic understanding of the law of demand. Remembering that, too, that this state has been the most financially insolvent, or the second most financially insolvent state in the union for the last 13 years by every institution that measures these solvency levels, right? Never came up. Basic understanding of the law of demand. Questions that comported with that. Questions that demanded that of the candidates in asking the question never came up. And no mention of ECS. No mention of educational cost sharing. No mention of unfunded liabilities. Passing mention of the budget, right? We went over this on this show. Oh, do I have this? Yes, I do. I think I do. No, I don't. Oh, let me pull this up real quick into my notes. We went over this on the show when it comes to the budget this year and the supposed, and it's definitely a supposed, surplus that Ned Lamont has claimed. We went over this on this channel repeatedly. We went through the budget, and you guys have probably seen this video I put together where if we jump along, you can see we went through the budget. We went through the line items, and you can see if we pull this up and you look on the right here, you can see exactly what those budget surpluses were. $271.8 million, not the $3 billion that Ned Lamont claimed that it was, right? We went through the whole thing. Line item by line item. The surplus is at best under 300 million and probably more like 4.2 million. You know what? Let me go ahead and put that link in the chat so you guys can check that out too. Let's see if I can find that. I'll find that link on my other page of notes. So yeah, here, let me pop this into YouTube, and I can pop this into Facebook. The surplus is at best under $300 million and probably more like $4.2 million. And that 4-minute video that I just shared with everybody, as soon as this is over, check it out, guys. I went through this in pedantic detail, and it only took 4 minutes. So just take 4 minutes of your time and check out the video as soon as we're done. And it was done on the back of some pretty insane revenue projections. This surplus what happened on the back of some pretty insane revenue projections, which included a new tax, which Ned Lamont, of course, has since lied about. And it was primarily on the back of almost $1 billion in one-time COVID handouts, plus draining reserves, and a little bit of, cooking the books with some debt reconciliation. And it was only Harding that even gave passing mention to this issue. And when he talked about bringing back a balanced budget in his opening statements. And speaking of opening statements, we can go to Ava Zimmerman's opening statements, where she opened by basically saying the reason she wants to get into this position is because she spent her whole life in politics for all intents and purposes. And when did she first get involved in politics? When she was 12 years old. Why is it that when she was 12 years old, as a 12-year-old, she got into politics? Again, that's where that quote came from. Quote, 12-year-olds know right from wrong. Are you sure about that, Ava? 12-year-olds can tell right from wrong? There's no follow-up to that? Like I'm pretty sure if that debate moderator was in any way centrist, there'd be a follow-up question like, whoa, what do you mean by that? Like, how far are you willing to carry that? Are you willing to carry that concept into the law? Which is an especially relevant question since you're running for a Senate district seat. You want to be in the Senate and you believe this? like I'm willing to grant that there could be a pathway. It's a pretty narrow pathway, but there could be a pathway if we thread the needle to this not being super objectionable. But what you wouldn't want to follow this up, even yourself. If I said something like that, Democrats would be jumping down my throat saying pedophile, right? They would be jumping down my throats on something if I said something like that. So for me, if I said something like that, I would contextualize the thing and make it clear that I am not talking about 12-year-olds having consent, 12-year-olds having agency. Not to mention the obvious question of like, really? That's what you were doing when you were 12 years old? And part of her opening statements was a mention that she works for the union that represents police officers. And, when the interests of the electors you represent come into conflict with the union you're also representing, well, no follow-up there. No questions on that either. The top three priorities that they would later on mention in the debate in terms of Zimmerman, it was healthcare, housing, and education. And Steve Harding said affordability, safety, and preserving open space. I want to repeat that. I want you guys to see the difference in the spirit and ethos of the things. What is it that binds the three things that Steve says? What is it that binds the three things that Ava says? And what is it, and how is it that that idea separates the two? Okay, Ava, healthcare, housing, education. Steve, affordability, safety, preserving open space. One is a series of tangible things, right? One is healthcare. So what she means is somebody's labor. Like, you know what that's going to mean. Housing, a physical building. Education, well, that's going to be a school. That's going to mean paying teacher salaries. Steve Harding said affordability. What's the tangible side of affordability? It's almost like he might as well have said something like liberty, right? Like, it's a concept. So it is something that as a concept you can do without it being a physical thing that's going to be dependent on taking from someone and giving to somebody else. Safety. Again, what's the tangible thing that we're talking about when it comes to safety? Well, obviously, there isn't anything. The only way you would enact law that is in relation to safety, if you're comporting also with affordability and the concept of liberty, would be to leverage a negative right, freedom from rather than freedom to, preserving open space, preservation. So this isn't something that I would focus on, but you notice that the three things that Ava said are stuff, and the three things that Harding said are concepts, right? So a tangible thing versus a concept. We're not going to spend too much time on that, but I wanted everyone to understand what these things are. And I think that really speaks to the heart of the difference between these two candidates. There was a huge amount of time that was spent on the police accountability bill. And I'll give you my thoughts real quick on the police accountability bill, because we've gone over the police accountability bill on the show. We read it on the show. We read the entire bill in its entirety. I'm a libertarian. I'm the crazy libertarian in the room. And I thought it was way over the line. I thought even by my standards it went too far. And this is why every Republican voted against it and some Democrats voted against it, right? And the fact that it refers to police accountability, right? Steve Harding said that this bill that he didn't vote for, right, put a significant burden on local police, end quote. This is 100% true. And this is why, and like Steve Harding said, this is why the police officers are dropping like flies. This is why we're having so many resignations. This is why it came out today that the New York Police Department's resignation rate is 42% higher than it has ever been in this year. This year's this past month's resignation rate. No. They said it was, I got this correct. The resignation rate of police officers in New York City for this year is 42% higher than last year. And the resignation rate was the highest it's ever been last year. So 42% higher than the highest rate. Steve Harding also claimed that the state is over 200 employees understaffed when it comes to the state police. And the accountability bill had something to do with that, ostensibly. I would follow up, Steve, with where does that number come from? What do you mean by that? Where does that come from? Like, what is that based on? But when it comes to Zimmerman, like what Steve said, like my opposition to Steve is basically citation needed. Listen to Zimmerman, who is employed by the union who opposed this bill. She is supposedly a representative employed by this union to represent their interests. And she voted for this bill that they opposed. So put that together. She was talking about, her response was to say that crime rates went down across Connecticut, which I'm not sure how that has anything to do with the question being asked. And I wish Steve would have followed up with something like, well, no, what's happening is it's centralizing in the cities. We don't have exact data on this, but we have anecdotal evidence at the very least, that within certain cities, it's skyrocketing in these cities because the crime is centralizing in those cities, right? Like if the crime rate in Warren, Connecticut goes down, it goes down because petty crimes are going down. It's not like we're going to have a high murder rate. No, it's not like we're going to have gun waving New Haven in Warren, Connecticut, right? Or in Sharon, Connecticut. No, the type of crime that happens in those are, generally speaking, petty crimes. And when you forcibly lock people at home for an entire year, right? When you forcibly shut down everyone's lives for an entire year, guess what's going to happen to petty crime? It's going to go down. But in areas where you already have violent crime, you would expect those types of violent crimes to, if anything, go up because you don't have the larger community out in the community to be eyes on the ground for this sort of thing, because the overwhelming majority of people, even in cities, are not criminals, right? It's like 90-something% of these people are not criminals. But when you pull 85% of that 90% off the road, then you no longer have, there's nobody here. There's nobody here to call the police. Right? So those hardened criminals that are conducting this violent crime, yeah, across Connecticut, that crime rate might be slightly down. But when it comes to these areas where they need these police officers and where the state has refused to respond to that, I wish Steve had followed up with this sort of line of questioning. To that effect, Ava also then followed up with the quote of the night, quote, Cornwall has no crime, end quote. What? There is no town in this state whose crime rate is zero. It can be really, really close to zero. The violent crime rate may be, for all intents and purposes, zero. But like, what? Criminal trespass? What? Possession of an illegal substance, of a controlled substance? What? Like, to make that claim, are you sure about that? Well, Ginny Landgroup was there from the 30th District, and it was amazing. I sat like 3 rows directly behind her, and when Ava said that, Ginny was like, you could see her visibly react to the thing, throw her hands up in the air and say, and like, what? What are you talking about? Number one, this has nothing to do with the police accountability bill, and number two, what? Like, is this seriously the claim you're going to be making? Like, I'm not going to say that this is stupid or crazy, but man, do I need more information, need citation. There was some time spent on local zoning laws, which we've talked about on the show. Like, the Democrats got their way, and in doing so, abdicated their duly elected responsibility to the state. And not opting out of the state level demands on our changes to our zoning laws, which I actually was in favor of those changes, but they should come from here. They should come from New Milford. If I'm the only one in town that's in favor of these sort of things, then it should not make it through. It should not make it through this town's zoning. If it's Bridgeport and everyone's in favor of this thing making it through zoning, then Bridgeport can have that thing go through zoning. If I'm actually in the majority and it gets through zoning here in New Milford, again, so be it. So be it. We talked about this on the show. Steve Harding seems to be at least kind of in line with me. In fact, no, I would say he seems to be rather emphatically in line with that idea. He was mentioning that he was unequivocally opposed to statewide housing regulations, and kind of impressively made a direct citation of the legislation when it comes to local zoning and affordable housing in 8-30G, the G being a reference to seniors. Ava's response was, again, confusing. Her response to the question of local zoning and where that should stay. When it comes to affordable housing, Section 8. No, it wasn't even about affordable housing. It was just about local zoning. Section 8 is not necessarily affordable housing. What? I mean, affordable housing is not necessarily Section 8 housing. And then she talked about grants and federal money for these affordable housing programs. What does that have to do with local zoning? Right? Like, honestly, I can't even call this a policy I disagree with. The response just makes no sense. Like, I don't even know how to respond to this. I would love for this to have been just like her engaging in the quote, the affordable housing Mott and Bailey, where for me, affordable housing means if you're going to use capital A, capital H, the proper noun affordable housing, Section 8 housing. It means government subsidized or fully paid for housing, right? That's all it means. But, you could challenge me by saying, well, no. Sometimes it just means cheap housing. Sometimes it just means, 1-bedroom apartments where you don't have much in the way of amenities because it's cheap, right? And that's all we're looking for. It's just something cheap when you're 22 years old, and you just want something you can save some money with, some affordable housing, lowercase a, lowercase h. I've talked about Mott and Bailey in my series on philosophical concepts, so you guys will have to check that out sometime. But no, it wasn't even a Mott and Bailey. Like, her response and following up to this was that when it comes to affordable housing, quote, when it comes to affordable housing, she doesn't, quote, want to see corporate greed or capitalism take over, end quote. What? Number one, when did where does this denigration of capitalism in general come from? First things first, if she's talking about free markets, that's obviously what you need in order for housing to be affordable. That's as true as the fact that bachelors are married men. That bachelors are not married men. I mean, doesn't this just sound like some sort of YouTube communist talking point? What does this have to do with the topic here? On inflation, which is affecting everyone right now, with every step that they take, with every breath that they take, there was one question. One question on inflation, right? If you follow polling data, the number one topic that people care about is the economy. The number two topic people care about is inflation. And then it's a giant step down to the number three topic. And then that number three topic changes whether you're a Democrat, Republican, or an independent. But all three of those positions agree that the two most important concerns right now are the economy and inflation. And those two today are obviously interlinked. There was one question on the topic. And in addressing the question of what to do about inflation, Steve Harding mentioned that the state surplus, and mentioned how he wanted balanced budgets, and that he cautioned that when it came to the balance, that it came to the state surplus, and that it was, quote, balanced on federal funds, end quote, which is true. We talked about this on the show. We went through that. I already showed you the video you guys can check out. What he wanted to do was to nix the highway usage tax, which he argues would save truckers $90 million. And he wants to get rid of, quote, administrative taxes and fees, end quote, which cost more to collect than the revenue they actually would generate. I mean, if that's true, if those sort of things exist, and as the crazy libertarian in the room, they obviously exist, right? Obviously, I'm going to believe that they exist. But if that's true and they exist, I don't know how you disagree with this. Ava's response to what to do about inflation was, she said she wanted two things: public option and universal child care. Those are the exact words she used. So she wants in response to the problem of money printer go burr monetary policy, she wants the state to pay for everything related to medicine and everything related to child care. In response to money printer go burr monetary policy, she wants to print more money or raise taxes. Okay. I mean, this is a serious case of bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it works out for him. Like, the solution to inflation is more inflation of the supply of money. There's a brief conversation on weed. And as a little crazy libertarian in the room, I think you guys all know what my take is on it. I don't like it, but it should obviously be legal, and it should be treated like, as Larry Sharp says, onions. Steve Harding's take, though I'm not perfectly in alignment with it, okay, it's reasonable. Quote, if you're finding dealers who are selling fentanyl, they need to go to jail because they're killing people, end quote. He said that he's not opposed to its existing legality, at least from the standpoint of he knows that this is a non-issue. He's aware of his position as a Republican in office in a state like Connecticut. There's no point wasting time, money, energy on trying to get that turned around. He says he's okay with it at the very least. Now, again, Steve's take on weed is not exactly the libertarian take, but it's reasonable. I can live with it. I can say, all right, Steve, fine. If you're saying to me that we're not going to touch this weed thing until we get like 50 other things taken care of, great. I am totally okay with getting those 50 other things taken care of. I will make a bargain right now to the Republicans in the room. If we can get those 50 other things through, I will concede weed entirely to you, even though it should obviously not be illegal, right? If Zimmerman, of course, said her exact words were more commerce, more tourism. Yeah. So, like, it's not like the libertarian take, right? The libertarian take is my body, my choice on this matter, right? Like, essentially, in this case, it's more commerce, more tourism. We want people coming from out of state for that. Like, I want people coming in from out of state, and okay, I want them to spend money, and weed should be legal, but this isn't exactly the strongest of arguments in favor of weed, right? Like, I am in favor of there being titty bars, right? Like, I'm perfectly okay with titty bars being legal. And there being a few of them here in the state of Connecticut. Like, but do we really want degeneracy to just be like the thing that attracts people? No. We want like beaches and the leaves and the town green to be the thing that attracts people to the state. We want jobs to be a thing that attracts people to the state. And when it comes to weed, like there isn't much to it. It's an incredibly easy thing to grow. And in fact, if you have the right environment, weed grows like a weed. So, you know, if we're going to boil it down to the most reductionist standpoint, I guess I would lean more towards Ava in this one. But, you know, I don't know. It's really not an issue in this state. Like Steve said, he's not going to really be opposing this sort of thing because he knows he's wasting his time with it. There was like 20 minutes of this debate on abortion. On abortion. I'm sorry, but like I am not wasting any time on this topic. Steve said he doesn't oppose the existing legislation, which caps at roughly 24 weeks, which by the way, here in Connecticut makes us way outside the bounds of what the regulations are with the entire rest of the developed world. The entire rest of the developed world is more restrictive than Connecticut is when it comes to smishmorshin, right? And Steve said that he's not going to be opposing the existing legislation. This is a goddamn non-issue in this state. In this state, this is a non-issue, and we should not be even wasting time at debates talking about this sort of thing. Ava Zimmerman, in response to the abortion question, went off on some trans and LGBTQ health, whatever. I don't care. There was no limiting principle that Ava espoused to say, you know what? Maybe while the baby is crowning and you can see the head of the baby coming out the vagina, right? Like as you can see the baby's head, maybe it shouldn't be cool for mom to take a knife and put the knife through the baby's skull. Maybe that's a line that you might want to draw. But if you're going to do that, you have to have a nuanced conversation about what is in the womb, which nobody wants to talk about, especially the left. The left, I'm so frustrated by this entire topic, right? Like, I'm not going to tell you what my position is on abortion because it's a very nuanced conversation, right? Like, what's in the womb? That's the question that we should be asking, not should abortion be legal or illegal? Because if what's in the womb is a baby, then it's murder. And there's no question about whether it should be legal or illegal. If it's just a tumor, then it's just a tumor. Then there's no question about whether or not it should be legal or illegal. right? So I don't know. Ava Zimmerman espoused no limiting principle. Steve said he doesn't want to. He's not going to oppose the existing legislation. He doesn't oppose the existing legislation. It's a battle he's not going to be fighting. I'm not spending any more time on Smith-Morrison. And I really hope it doesn't get brought up at any more debates. In this state, it's a complete waste of time to be even talking about it when it comes to the debate stage. Like I said, like a quarter of the debate was spent on environment. There was a question that was brought up that was an excellent question, I think. Electric vehicles don't pay towards the gas tax, which means that gas tax, that money that's ostensibly there to pay for the roads that these electric vehicles are using, if we're to let's say wave a magic wand and make the entire fleet of vehicles in Connecticut, like every vehicle that everybody owns in Connecticut, an electric vehicle, then there's no gas tax to collect, which means there's no revenue to offset the cost of the maintenance of the Connecticut roads. So what do you do about that? It's a really good question. I think it's a genuinely really good question. And Steve Harding's response was, quote, "I would caution against adding any further fees," end quote. Right? So the idea being, if you're going to have these electric vehicles on the road, should you insert some sort of tax on the electric vehicle to offset the fact that they aren't contributing towards that revenue source? Okay, that's a fairly libertarian response. In fact, not only is it a libertarian response, it's a direct answer to the question, and it's a measured response. It's not, well, let's take our environmental position and move it way off to the extreme. Like, he could have said something along the lines of FEVs, screw EVs, electric vehicles are a complete waste of time. To environment doesn't matter. Global warming isn't happening. The climate isn't changing. Humans have no involvement in any of this. He could have said that. He didn't say any of that. He just basically said, I'm not really in favor of adding any more fees, in direct answer to this question. And Ava's response was, quote, "Our environment is in peril right now. This emergency happened yesterday," end quote. I'll have to do a piece at some point on my philosophical concept series on catastrophization, because this is what's going on here. Because if she's serious about the way if she's honest and serious about the way she's characterized the thing, our environment is in peril right now, this emergency happened yesterday, then the only bill she should even be talking about, she should be purposely not answering any question otherwise that comes up and using every second of her debate moment to say, the only bill I want is to send the Connecticut National Guard, D-Day style, over to the east to invade China and India, and to demand the U.S. join in colonizing all of Asia with a D-Day style total war invasion backed by nukes. That's the appropriate response to this type of characterization. If you're going to take the Bill Nye, the earth is literally on fire right now. That's what the word literally means. That's what the word fire means. That's what the word now means. I mean, is this plastic bottle on fire right now? Is this microphone on fire right now? Is this mouse on fire right now? The entire planet is on fire, is literally on fire right now. Is my shirt emitting flames, just exploding off of my chest and burning down the rest of the room? Or is this characterization BS, right? But this is what we're getting here. It's the catastrophization, the exact catastrophization that Bill Nye's been engaging with, and that perfectly aligns with the AOC camp of environmental policy, right? And on that matter, when it comes to this sort of thing, does Ava Zimmerman disagree with anything within the AOC environmental camp? How about in general? Is there anything politically or philosophically that Ava Zimmerman disagrees with AOC on? Like, I can tell you right now, there are a bunch of things that let's say Donald Trump. There are a bunch of things that Donald Trump and Steve Harding disagree with right now. I bet you Steve Harding's position on abortion is not in line with Donald Trump's. I bet you right now, when it comes to the results of the 2020 election, Steve Harding's take on that is probably not the same as Donald Trump's. And yet, here we are. I wonder what the heterodox position Ava is. Because Steve has a heterodox position when it comes to abortion. Steve has a heterodox position when it comes to electric vehicles. Steve has a heterodox position when it comes to, at least in some degree, weed. Right? To at least some degree, weed. Steve has a somewhat heterodox position when it comes to a lot of things. I wonder what the heterodox position is from Ava. The entire time I was waiting for her to say something that didn't comport with, again, the AOC wing of Democrats nationally. DC Democrats here in Connecticut. Right? When this is why at the end, there was a question of how would you reach across the aisle? And one of the things that they actually agreed on was the ballot question. The ballot question would be is going to ask folks, do you want to amend the state constitution to allow for early voting? Now, I would say maybe if it's in person and there's a voter ID requirement attached to that, like maybe if there's like a lot of controls put in place to make sure that isn't abused, maybe I could see a pathway to yes, but they were both yes. And Steve Harding then did offer the caution that this is something that we need to work with town clerks on. And okay, that's a fair caution. It isn't coming in blindly with just the political take, right? That is coming in with a degree of measurement. That is coming in with, a nuance to this sort of thing. So in this case, this is an example of reaching across the aisle that Ava gave as an example of something that she would do when reaching across the aisle. This isn't her reaching across the aisle. This is when it comes to, like, again, Steve's position on abortion, right? At least when it comes to the law of the thing. This isn't her reaching across the aisle. This is the aisle. This is the bridge this is the gap already being bridged. You'll notice too that, again, this is something that the far left will say when it comes to bridging gaps, working with the other side. It's not finding the place where you might be able to convince somebody to agree with you because you have some underlying philosophical agreement. No, it's not reaching out and saying, okay, I will concede this so long as we can get this from you, right? There's no bargain taking place. There's no give. It's only take. And that's not you reaching across the aisle. That's the aisle reaching across to you. So in every place where she was asked to give an example of that, it was where does Steve agree with the already established orthodox position of the left, right? At least legislatively, not philosophically, but at least when it comes to the passing of certain legislation. The election, the question came up of fair elections and disinformation. Steve, the exact quote I have here from Steve is, I would caution against hiring a disinformation czar. No kidding, Steve. You don't want to have a ministry of truth. Interesting. He mentioned freedom of speech. He did mention that the elections were fair. There's a heterodox position with, say, the Donald Trump narrative when it comes to elections. Ava's response was that she wanted tax dollars for journalism. Again, like, I don't even know how to oppose this because this doesn't even answer the question, right? Like, this has nothing to do with, she did concede that, yeah, this is a place where we agree. Yes, because the gap was already bridged. Right? The gap was already bridged when Steve mentioned that he agreed that the elections were fair. And she wanted more tax dollars for things like CPTV and PBS and public broadcasting and money printer go brr. The question of the income tax rate did come up. This is a serious battle among libertarians here, right? And the question wasn't even about income tax in general and the economics behind taxing production and productivity rather than taxing consumption. No, it was the balance between taxing individuals and taxing businesses. Where should income taxes fall more on? Okay, well, Steve said, quote, I would fight against any tax increases anywhere, end quote. Ava wanted to balance the thing so that it was weighed more towards big businesses, which she said were 200 to 300 or more employees, and the slippery slope doesn't exist. She then said, quote, trickle-down economics doesn't work. funny you say that, Ava, because it's also a straw man. And for those of you who haven't seen, the book that I would recommend in watching all of this is Trickle Down Theory and Tax Cuts for the Rich by Thomas Sowell. It's a whopping 13 pages. It should take you about 35 minutes to read. It's got 50-something citations at the end. So for those of you who are saying citation needed, they're there. And again, this is something that I did on my Mike Reed's channel in 35 minutes. So for those of you who, let me get this brought up. For those of you who missed out, yes, I read this entire book on my channel, and you can watch the whole read right there on my channel. Here, let me go ahead and just drop the link. Let me go ahead and drop the link in the chat right now, so you guys can check that out, which is a channel I haven't had a lot of time to devote time to, and I really want to get back to because that's the sort of thing that I'm really most interested in. And yeah, so if you guys check out that channel, I'm hopefully in the next 2 or 3 weeks, I'll be able to start getting more time to it. But do check out that video. It explains the history of where those phrases come from in terms of trickle-down economics and tax cuts for the rich. And they were a straw man. They are a straw man today, and they were a straw man when they were invented by the left as a straw man so that they could have something to attack in the 1930s. In short, Steve Harding isn't, and when it comes to the whole debate, when it comes to these candidates, from what I could tell of the debate, in short, Steve Harding isn't the straw man the left paint the GOP to be generally. And when it comes to Ava Zimmerman, I can't think of any policy or philosophy she and AOC would disagree on. We're electing AOC into Hartford with the 30th Senate seat if she gets elected, from what I can tell of this debate. Steve Harding and I may have some real disagreements, but Ava Zimmerman is wild. That was the word I used at the beginning of this conversation to characterize the debate. I don't know what other word I can use without going way into the hyperbolic end of the spectrum of adjectives. She may even be less reasonable than Hillary Ram. So you guys get an understanding of what I got out of this debate. It comes to no surprise to me that somebody like her has spent her whole life, for all intents and purposes, in politics. Right? Like when you get into politics and spend all of your life in politics since you were 12 years old, you know where that's coming from, and at best, that's coming from the peer pressure. But let's be honest, we know where that's coming from. Let your kids be kids, Jesus. Right? Like she sounded like somebody who had never had her feet held to the proverbial fire. And Steve may be being too kind. You know, if I was on that debate stage, I'd spend the whole time roasting her ideas. And maybe that's unfair. And maybe that makes Steve a better man and candidate than I am. I don't know. Let's get him on the show. Steve, if you're watching, come on the show. And let's see if he has anything to follow up on with the debate. So that's how all of that went. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on all of this. I swear to God, I'm not hyperbolizing any of this. I'm not, treating this. I don't think I'm treating this unfairly. I may be treating this with my own lens, of course, but I don't think I'm treating this unfairly. So let's go into the comments and let's go into live Q&A like we talked about. I would love to see if there's anybody in the Discord server. Because I would love to pull people in. Folks, the link to the Discord server, if you want to join in, is in this video's description, and we put it in the comments section here, so you guys can check that out. I want to see if anyone is in the... no, we don't have anybody there. Joe, it's an existential crisis. Why wouldn't it be in peril? If it's an existential crisis, it's not just an existential threat. It's an existential crisis. So it's not just a threat to your mere existence. It's a crisis, right? So it's even worse than a threat. So again, like if that's the way that she's going to catastrophize or characterize the thing, then fine. But the only reasonable response, especially if it's going to be in peril, is again, that she should be focusing all of her time and energy on sending the Connecticut National Guard over to China right now to invade D-Day style, because that's where that's happening. This is the only country in the world in the last 12 years And in the last 12 years, there's only been one country during that 12-year span that's lowered their overall CO2 emissions, and that's the United States. China and India aren't doing that. They're just not doing that. Right? So if you're going to take the hard left position on where the temperature increases are coming from, man-made CO2 emissions, then it's China and India. And if that is an existential threat, and they are the only ones doing that, and that's where all of this threat is coming from. If that's where this existential crisis is coming from, then the only like how would you describe Adolf Hitler's invasion of Poland in 1939? Was it an existential crisis to the United States? How about when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor? Was it an existential crisis? Because if you're going to say, well, no, I wouldn't use that harsh language. Well, if she's using the language that's more harsh than the language you would use to characterize December 7th, 1941, then of course the response is nuke China. Of course the response is then we're going to be sending planes and boots on the ground right now. We're enacting the draft, and every able-bodied male 18 and over is going over to China right now to shoot as many Chinese people as we possibly can, backed with the threat of nuclear total annihilation, or maybe existential crisis. Maybe this emergency happened yesterday. Maybe in peril isn't exactly the right characterization. Maybe you want to walk that back. Maybe that characterization is bullshit. So, I mean, if that's how she wants to characterize it, okay, but understand that that's where that's going to be coming from. So let's go to Facebook as I see some commentary on Facebook. Bob Greco here. Hey, Bob, thanks for joining in. Ray Lewis, Ray, who's a regular of the show. Ray, thanks for tuning in. Paul, the veterans seeked an apology from the DTC chairperson and attended several town council meetings and hoped for an apology for the veterans and the citizens of New Milford. There was none given. If an apology isn't given, why not the reason the Democrats that were candidates not opposing it? I don't understand what the second half of that is, Paul. You're going to have to retype that. Paul Murphy, Cindy Harrison, 69th, is running unopposed, but needs to be more in view as the 69th is our new representative area. That's true. The town of New Milford now has 4 districts that are three districts that represent it in Hartford in terms of the House of Representatives. That is the 108th, which we're going to have on. So stay tuned on Tuesday night. We are going to have the incumbent of the 108th on. That is Pat Callahan. We'll have him on Tuesday night at 7 p.m. So Pat, thanks for coming on. Paul, thanks for helping me get Pat to come on. But Cindy Harrison in the 69th. The 69th covers a small part of extreme southeastern New Milford. So if you're in the far southeastern part of New Milford, you are no longer in Billy Mo Buckby's district like I am. Billy, the invitation is always going to be there, man. Love to have you on the show. If you're in that far southeast corner, maybe check your map because you may now be in the 69th district, which I believe includes Brookfield. I don't know where else it includes. I know about New Milford. I know it includes parts of New Milford. Cindy Harrison is running apparently in the 69th unopposed. I didn't know she was running unopposed. I knew she was running in the 69th. Is running unopposed, but needs to be more in view as the 69th is our new representative area. So yes, now because of the census, because of the redrawing of borders, we do have part of New Milford in the 69th. Guys, check into that if you think you might be part of that district. Harding, hands down, best choice for the 30th district. Paul, I don't know how to characterize how much I can agree with you. If my only information on those two candidates was that debate, and it's not, and we'll have to get into that another night. If my only information were those two candidates, my jaw would be dropped in response to Ava, and I think I would be pulling Steve Harding's lever as hard as pulling it as hard as I possibly could until it broke off. So can't say I disagree with you there, Paul. Let's see. There's some more commentary here. Paul, again, DTC candidates should need to say why they didn't oppose the mailers but ran with it. Why? Well, Paul, I did have a DTC candidate on in 2001. I had one, and I got to give her credit. Robin Mann, when she came on, got to give her credit. At least she came on. At least she did answer the question. It was a sugarcoating and pussyfooting. certainly, but she at least did answer the question. And, we had audience Q&A, and Joe really grilled her on that question when it came to not just the campaign flyer, but the campaign material in general. I've got my response on her response on this channel as a separate clipped clip. I don't think you guys are going to like it. Her response is, well, that's politics. Deal with it. And I don't know that that's the wisest of responses, especially here in New Milford. So one person has said why she was okay to just run with it and that she had no objections to it. And now the response that we're getting from the DTC is that it never happened. But like I said, like I showed you guys at the beginning of the show, yes, you called us Nazis. And I would love to see somebody get onto a debate stage to have that conversation. So if you folks are out there and have a way to share this with Hillary or the DTC, I would gladly invite Hillary onto the show. I would gladly invite Mary Jane onto the show. I would gladly invite a ranking member and officer, especially their current sitting chair, Hillary Ram, onto the show to have that at least conversation. Maybe it doesn't need to be a debate. Maybe it's between me and her. Maybe I moderate a conversation between two people, between Sal and Hillary. Sal, you know what? Maybe not Sal. Maybe somebody who's a little bit more composed than Sal, right? Because Sal, I love you. I love you. Everything you said was right. But when you come onto the show, you got to be composed. And maybe that person is Paul. Maybe Paul is the one that I would invite on to, now that he's a councilman especially, to have that conversation with Hillary. I don't think it would be fair to have her have that conversation with Pete, right? But maybe if Paul wants to come on, if we can convince her to come on, man, would that be great. Man, would it be great to get some debates on. Hopefully that's something we can have looking forward. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks everybody who's joined in. Thanks everybody who's watched this debates. Thanks in advance to everyone who is going to be tuning in on Tuesday. Again, look out for that. Share when that comes out. Do everything you can to share that because love to get some commentary. It's best when we have these candidates on to have an engaging conversation with them, to have you guys be able to hold my feet to the fire, to have you guys be able to hold the candidates' feet to the fire. And in doing so, I think I think that's how we get the best response when it comes to the ballot box, when it comes to picking the right candidates. I've said it a million times before. I would much rather you guys get a library card than a voter registration card. But in the meantime, again, genuinely grateful for everybody who comes on. You guys are the reason I do this. So we'll see you in the next one. Good night, everybody.